Hello, fellow truth seekers. This is Doug coming to you once again on, well, it's not Shabbat anymore. It's actually night. Of course, you know, the way my understanding is that Shabbat ends at sundown on Saturday, so it's probably about 11:30, 11:41 Saturday night. Actually, it's really Sunday now, according to biblical chronology. But just really want to just kind of talk about some of the stuff, you know, that's going on, and you know, they try to you know, of course, this is the way Hasatan deceives people, make them think that things are getting better, going to get better. Oh, this year's, you know, the golden age begins, you know, and it doesn't look to me like that's what's happening. I mean, you know, people in Congress got up there and was talking about the aerosol injection, you know, spraying the planes, spraying and all that stuff, and you know, and these states supposedly outlawing it, but yet they're still doing it. I mean, I usually walk the dogs the last time, you know, like when I shut the store down. I'll take them for a walk, and we closed at 11. So I got them, was walking them, and it was clear out, clear, and you can see the stars and all that. And I look up there, and lo and behold, I see these planes, you know, and with their big long streaks, and we got 4 dogs that I have to walk, and I walk them 2 at a time. And so I got the first 2, walked them, the 2 males, and then the 2 females, I walked them. And by the time I walked them 2 males and got back, got the 2 females hooked up and walked them and back, the sky was completely cloudy. I mean, you couldn't see the stars now. And I mean, just in that short period of time, I mean, probably like 30 minutes. And so, you know, they're not stopping it. They're just doing it more at night now. And they've got it to where they don't have to make as many. You know, they're laying it out heavier and thicker, so they don't have to make as many trips back and forth to do the same amount of coverage. They've got, you know, whatever they're putting up there now covers quicker and, you know, covers a larger area. And then, you know, them talking about this guy out there in Texas that last year, I think, he had been camping or whatever and got bit by a tick. And he ate some beef, and he had a bad allergic reaction to it. And he hadn't had allergic reactions to red meat before being bit by the tick. And then he, you know, got past that. And then like a month later, he went to eat a hamburger, and he had an allergic reaction, and it killed him. And come to find out, old Billy Boy, Bill Gates, is behind it. That him and I think it was some European researchers developed, I mean, he funded it, developed some kind of something that they put into these ticks that causes people to become allergic to red meat, to beef. And but I don't think it affects them with pork. And then not only that, but then all of a sudden, I mean, just you know, all of this engineered 3D printed meat. And, you know, genetically modified stuff. I mean, it looks horrific sickening that they're, and I mean, it's in all these stores. And they, a woman, she was going around there, and everything in there, I mean, everything that she, and as far as like processed food, every bit of it was something in it genetically modified. And I guess, and then there was a guy that was showing where he had a cabbage, big old head of cabbage, and he had it on a burner and had the burner on. Gas stove, and I mean, he had the burner lit and on, and he set that head of cabbage on there, and it didn't burn it. It didn't steam, it didn't do anything. I mean, it was like some kind of engineered plastic. And so, I guess, you kind of wonder, well, what's the moral of the story? Well, the moral of the story is that it's Genesis 6 all over again. And I've talked about this before on many occasions about the end. We can know what the end is going to be like from what the beginning was like. They're doing the same thing again. I mean, if you look at what it says that Yahweh looked down and saw that the whole earth had become corrupted. The whole earth, everything, not just men, the animals, the plants, all of it had become corrupted. The insects, I mean, the same thing they're doing now. Everything is becoming corrupted. And so the conclusion that this leads me to is that we are at the end. I mean, that's kind of been the theme of my commentaries for the last couple of videos, is that tells me we're at the end. Not to tribulation in the millennial kingdom and all, but to the very end, the very last days, before judgment, before the consummation of all things. And so for people, there's still so many people that are still, blind and deaf to it, that, it's really amazing to me that people can't see it. And a lot of that, and there's a lot of people that are totally on board for it. I mean, like over there in England, I mean, I just heard, listened to a guy that was saying that over there now they're going door to door, making people take these things in their arm. And what's to say that ain't going to come here next? And these people up here, this, the Make America Great Again people, I think all that stuff is, people are just being played. They're just being played, for them to buy time to do the things that they're doing, to make it so that they have absolute control. One is the southern border. Like, oh, well, we need to, have a secure border and all that. Yeah, I agree. We do need a secure border. But it's a two-way street. It keeps people out, but it keeps people in. I mean, if things get really bad, you're not going to be able to escape. You're not going to be able to go to another country or, go into exile or whatever. You're going to be stuck here. And then their mad rush to build these data centers, these AI data centers and all that stuff. Now, the AI, as far as it actually being thinking or cognizant, or self-aware. I don't think so. No, I think it's more about being able to track everybody, to be able to, keep track of everybody, and to, have everybody in this database, and that they're going to have a tracking device on you, whether, or chip or whatever. And a lot of the chaos and all of this stuff that's coming out about the fraud, with food stamps and with child daycare centers and with these home health care providers and assisted living centers, medical stuff, like in Minneapolis and other places, not just there. I mean, it's all over the country. That's what they're going to use as an excuse to implement these chipping, putting chips in people, Neuralink or something like that, so that they know everything that I mean, and when you listen to people, I mentioned it, Larry Ellison saying, well, we've got to do this because we got to keep everybody in line. What about them? What about the elite? What about the technocrats? What about them? Are they going to be kept in line? And and not only that, but again, Yuval Noah Harari, the World Economic Forum, and of course they all, we're against them, and that's all part of the deception. Make you think that they're all against each other, and of course there are factions that are against each other and at odds with each other. The left hand and the right hand path and all that stuff. But the ultimate agenda, and I've said this, is the same. The end game is the same. There is no deviation from that. The ultimate end is destruction, which is what Hasatan wants. I mean, if you realize, and he does, he realizes that his end is near. I mean, as far as his ability to tempt and harass and torment human beings further is coming to an end. I mean, not his destruction, because he's a immortal being, but he is going to be cast into the lake of fire and be there forever. And so obviously, he doesn't have supernatural power, because otherwise he could get out of it or escape it or whatever. No, he relies on technology. Now, I think that these craft and all that stuff, these UFOs and stuff like that that people see and all that kind of stuff, I think that's what they're moving around in. And maybe even beyond that, for beings of his, position, planets, these so-called planets, is really what they're moving around in. And but when they don't have that technology, available, they get cast in the lake of fire. They're not going to have access to it. They're not going to be able to go around and do the things. I mean, him on his own, there's not really much, that he can do against humanity. What he does is he tempts people into doing the things that they do against each other. I mean, he really, ultimately, his power is very limited as to what he personally can do to us. And only what he does do to us through other people, by manipulating people into doing his bidding and siding with him. I mean, that's where you see the evil and all that stuff in the world. I mean, that's people that through the temptation of money and through lust and other things, he's got them. He got them, by giving them, what they were, truly lusting after, whether it was fame, fortune, power. I mean, the things that he uses to tempt people. Like when he got released out of the Abuso, Tartarus, the bottomless pit. When he got released and was able to come back out here and begin to deceive people again, what does he do? He goes looking for people that he can tempt to join his side. And he promises them everything that their heart desires. And of course, these were people that, again, I believe came out of the millennial kingdom. I mean, because, the fact is that people still were other than the saints and the apostles, the disciples and all, they were still living like they always lived. The ones that survived the Great Tribulation, I mean, they went on living like they always did. And it even talks about people, that their children would, be 100 years old and they'd still be considered like children. So their lives were extended. The talks about the water coming out of his throne and healing the oceans and healing the water. Because again, I believe they were more advanced than what we've been led to believe, and there was a great war, and it wasn't just people involved, but there was Hasatan and them was involved too. I mean, it was a because Josephus, Tacitus, and others, I mean, they said they saw them up there in chariots and on horses and stuff up there in the clouds fighting. And so with that being the case, and weapons of mass destruction and stuff like that, we see the evidence of it. I mean, as I've said before about the vitrified glass being all over the place, which is evidence of great heat. The kind of heat that can generally only be generated by a nuclear blast. And because the first place they really noticed vitrified glass was out there in the Nevada desert, where they tested those first nuclear devices. The Manhattan Project. And whenever after the initial blast, then they went in and investigated to see what all the results of it was, and they were finding vitrified glass. And so they realized that the great heat, the great heat is what was causing that. And generally that's from a thermonuclear blast. And so, and you see all these melted, what people thought were just eroded hills and stuff like that. Now they're beginning to realize that they're melted. Melted structures. They can actually see like where there was openings, door openings and window openings and stuff like that, but they're it's like melted wax. And the Bible talks about that, like mountains melting like wax. At the presence of Yahweh. And so, and again, they were all over the world. The Romans were, and the disciples, Paul and them, they were all over, going around proselytizing all around the world. And So it's just amazing that, and that's the other thing, is that should be a indicator of the time that we're living in, is the fact that all of this stuff is starting to be revealed. Here, this time, why now? Why not earlier? Why were people, I believe there were individuals here and there that were being awakened and coming to the knowledge of the truth, probably all along. But they were shut down, or killed, or, suppressed in some way from getting it out, or people just thought they were crazy. Because again, like myself, being brought up in the religious system and being indoctrinated with their belief system, I mean, it stands to reason that when somebody like that would come out with something that seemed to be so far-fetched and so far off from the mainstream Christian viewpoint, the mainstream belief. Even, when you look at even diverse Christian denominational churches and stuff, their basic beliefs are pretty similar, but it comes down to dispensationalism and other things that separate their belief doctrinally, their interpretation of things. And so that's what sets the different denominational religion, Christian denominational churches apart, is just doctrine. But they're, supposedly their basic tenet, that Christ died and, was resurrected and ascended up to heaven. Most of them believe that, or teach that anyway. But even that they're getting further and further away from that truth. And so, for the longest time, that was really the basic truth, that the only really basic truth that we had. All the rest of it was wrong. Their interpretations, and they were interpreting events that had already happened as being future. And of course, I can see how Satan would be, happy to try to promote that view, so that people wouldn't realize just how close to the end they were. And that it would be more palatable to people, because they would figure, well, we got plenty of time, and before these things are going to happen, these bad things, these tribulation events and stuff. And now, the similarity to the tribulation events is, they're pretty close. I mean, as far as the evil rising, the ability to destroy ourselves, the amassing of great wealth right next to great poverty. And of course, that was the same case back then. Those things were happening back then. I mean, the Romans and the elite, great wealth, I mean, enormous wealth, and the people that were in league with them. Most people think it was just Rome and the people that would become the Italians. No, the Germanic peoples, the Middle Eastern peoples, Arabic people, they were all in alignment with Rome. The Greeks, and the rest of Europe, there wasn't really that many people there. I mean, they were, tribes, tribal kind of people or whatever. I mean, and and they were a lot of them, these people that had been the Israelites that were over there and that had escaped from Assyria and went there. And the Germanic peoples, they were really the Assyrian people, and may even still by that time, by the Roman period, they probably still identified as Assyrian people. You know, I mean, it was still relatively close to that period of time. I mean, that had only been about 600 years before that. So, you know, from the 1st century or whatever, AD. But again, too, you know, what I was talking about last week about how, you know, in previous videos about altering times and traditions and customs and laws and calendars. I mean, they've manipulated and altered everything that they could. You know, altered the timeline rather than, you know, why would you cut off, you know, the time before the Messiah and then start a whole new timeline? You know, why would you not just, okay, you know, it was in the year 4250 AD, you know, 4250 since creation or whatever, or since Adam, or since the fall, or however you wanted to do it. But just continue it, you know, to where now we would be in the year 6995. Well, because you couldn't, it'd be hard to manipulate, harder to manipulate the timeline. If you just started fresh with a fresh new timeline from zero, then it'd be, you know, especially in the beginning, it'd be a lot easier to add and take away time out of that new timeline and events. So they just started it over, you know, and counted down, you know, counted down from the time of Adam or creation down to that period, and it's zero, the year zero or whatever, you know, 0 BC. I mean, you see how, you know, you begin to look into that. I mean, I always did think it was kind of crazy, you know, I mean, why they did that, but I just never really questioned it too much. Just like, well, why would you do that, you know? I mean, why not just continue, you know? But a lot of that comes from the evolutionists and stuff that say, oh, you know, it's millions or billions of years and all that kind of stuff. Now, granted, we don't know how old this world is. I mean, you know, it's pretty apparent to me, just from the way that the scriptures is worded, and especially in Genesis chapter 1 verse 2, that there was a previous world here, and, you know, people or entities or whatever. And then Genesis 1:26, you know, where it says, he tells these humans, the pre-Adamites, the people that were the first human, the 6th-day man, to be fruitful and replenish the earth. And to me, replenish means to replace something that has been used up or been, you know, it's time to go to the store and replenish the groceries. So they're, replenishing the earth to replace something that had been here. And of course, when he tells, you know, and the words there in the Hebrew is tohu wabohu, which it means to be desolate, without form, without, you know, blueprint. And when he's talking in the book of Isaiah, I can't remember exactly where it is, maybe in chapter 11, but he tells Isaiah, he says, I did not create the earth to be, and he used the same words, tohu wabohu. I didn't create it that way. I created it to teem with life. So initially, when it was initially created, Job chapter 38, when he tells Job, where were you when I laid the foundation and drawed the line upon it? You know, where were you at? Well, and it says that, you know, the sons of God shouted for joy, and the morning stars sang. Okay, well, when was that? Well, we don't know. But it was certainly more than 7,000 years ago. See, you know, we've been, you know, again, it's the same thing. Now, this present world is only 7,000 years old. Because again, when you listen to this, you know, it says the Spirit moved upon the waters and the dry land appeared. It was underwater. And so that world, the old world, which perished. And it's not talking about the world of Noah, because whenever the waters receded, this world was still here. It hadn't perished. People did. People perished, and, you know, a great majority of the animals and stuff perished. But the world itself did not. It still was here. You know, because it says that the waters receded and Noah settled on the mounts of Ararat. So, you know, so you begin, see, these are all the things, you know, like I say, I mean, growing up in the dispensational Protestant religion, they never talked about any of this stuff. None of it. I mean, they rarely ever talked about Daniel. They rarely ever talked about Revelation. You know, there was just certain things they focused on, and that was it. You know, they just, you know, and it was when I got to be grown and I began to get curious, you know, I mean, well, is it, you know, what about this? What about this? You know, they never, you know, and so I began to listen, you know, read commentaries and books by people like, you know, Walvoord and Hal Lindsey and, you know, a bunch of different scholars and people, you know, to see, you know, if they had anything to say about it. But they tended, they were the same way. You know, they were dispensationalists, you know, amillennialist or premillennialist or, you know, post-millennialist or whatever. I mean, and, you know, and I guess that's what you would call me now, is a post-millennialist. That, you know, that the millennial kingdom's already happened. So I'm in the post-millennial era, which means we're in Revelation chapter 20. We're at the end of the book. And that would seem to be why it seems, that's why it seems to me anyway. And I'm just talking, you know, I'm not dogmatic about anything, because, you know, things are being revealed so much that it just, you really cannot be dogmatic about stuff, because, you know, then you find out that you're wrong, and you have to come back and you know, apologize, or, you know, say, hey, I'm sorry, you know, I was wrong, you know. Well, I'm just talking, you know, you know, what things appear to me, and you know, how the deception is coming to its fruition, to its conclusion, because the awakening, people are awakening, that more and more people are beginning to wake up to it, that, you know, that we've been deceived, that we've been lied to about everything. And they use the educational system and stuff to perpetuate it. Just pretty much like Rockefeller told the board, the guy that was the head of the education department, just keep them busy and stupid. Because if people are learned and begin to be educated, really educated, then they begin to question stuff. They begin to realize that stuff don't add up, it don't make sense. So that's why they wanted to keep people stupid and feed them a bunch of just worthless garbage as far as, history and stuff that wasn't true. And realizing, they realized that, well, you can't go, I can't go back. Nobody can go back and prove them wrong. But fortunately, there are books and documents and stuff like that are from the period of the millennial kingdom. And I think that's where all these Bibles and stuff come from. All the ones that are pretty similar, like the Geneva Bible and the Tyndale Bible and the King James and all of them, they were probably, toward the end of the millennial kingdom, they were writing it down. All the stuff that they've been taught and all the, because the original Bible was not a book. It was a book of books, basically. I mean, that's what the Bible is, a book of books. They wasn't. The Old Testament was a bunch of scrolls. Papyrus scrolls or whatever. Linen scrolls or whatever they were using. And then, because books as we know it, supposedly didn't come around until the 1st century. Where they wrote on the front and the back and all that. And they may have on scrolls. They may have wrote on the back of them too. I don't know. I've never really seen myself in person a scroll, from the ancient world or anything. And the truth, I don't know that anybody has. Other than maybe like the Dead Sea Scrolls, because they, unless they're preserved in some way, they rot, turn to dust. The only thing that wouldn't would be like these copper plates and gold plates and stuff like that. The emerald tablets, gold tablets, copper tablets and stuff that they believe originated from before the flood. And then, even though the old world was destroyed, the remains of it are still here. What didn't get washed out into the water, and sunk down and get sucked back down into the earth and, recycled basically. And that may be some of the stuff that they find, when they're digging and all that stuff. Some of these, dinosaurs and stuff like that. Who knows? Some of these structures, they may be from that period. We don't know. Everything that they say about this stuff, about the pyramids, about Pumapunku, Baalbek in Lebanon, these pyramids over in China and in India, South America, it's all speculation. Every bit of it. Because them people down there, them natives down there, they would tell them people when the conquistadors and all that stuff supposedly came over there. They told them that they didn't know who built them. It was the people that was there before them. So okay, well, who was them people there before them? Before the flood, after the flood, before Adam, and that was just the remnants of it. Who knows? That's the thing is that all of the history has been, they've done a really good job of convoluting everything and just mixing it up so much that you can't tell heads from tails. And so, so the only thing that you know, I believe that the Ruach, because Yahushua said, it says in the last days he would pour out his Ruach on all flesh. The last days, and I believe that's now. And that there are people that are having visions and dreams and seeing these things that are coming to pass. And that, because I have them. I mean, I have dreams and stuff. Not like I did there for a while. And my dreams were more dealing with the demonic spiritual realm. Because, Paul says that we don't fight against flesh and blood. We're fighting against these spiritual entities. The demonic and the satanic. That's who our war is with. And, and especially the more that we become spiritual. In other words, our spiritual self, the more it becomes developed and we become less flesh. We die to the flesh. When we die to the flesh and become spiritual, then we're in that realm. And so, I've had dreams of it, and I had initially, I would get paralyzed, and I thought I was, and there's times I thought I was dreaming and I wasn't. I was awake. And I was being held down by one of these entities. And I was terrified. I mean, to the point where I couldn't go, I was trying to holler or whatever, and I couldn't even do that. And Becca, she said she heard me, before, in there moaning really, loud. And they were after me. And, I started praying. I would finally get to where I could say, Yahushua, and they would go away. But I began to pray, to be delivered from it. And of course, the only way I could be delivered from it was to face it. To actually face it. And in one of my dreams, I faced it. And they still come after me from time to time, but it doesn't, it doesn't have the effect on me that it did before. I'm not terrified. I know that my strength is in Yahushua, because I am in him and he's in me. And if he's in me and I'm in him, then I have access to that power. And, because he told his disciples when he sent them out, he gave them power over serpents and scorpions. And it wasn't just for them, it was for all believers that believe it. And it's not just talking about the physical serpents and scorpions. It's talking about the spiritual, because the battle that we're fighting is a spiritual battle. Even though it does manifest into the physical, because again, people who get trapped through their lust for power, for money, for fame, for fortune, for all of the things of this world, once they get trapped, they, like Yahushua told them Pharisees, says, you are of your father the devil, and you will do what he tells you to do. And that's where these people are at. Once they get trapped in that, they let their lust lead them down into the pit. Then they become slaves. And they do what their master tells them. And so that's why you see all this insanity going on around. I mean, it ain't just here, it's all over the world. I mean, it's everywhere. All of this, of course, there's some places where they, have clamped down on certain stuff, you know, like the transgender and the homosexuals and all that stuff. Yeah, like over in Russia, they slop that stuff down, you know. But in China, you know, they clamp down on it. And of course, over there in the Middle East, I mean, they'll cut your head off, man. But in the Western world, I mean, it's just gone completely off the rails. And the chaos, and of course, that's part of their plan. You know, the Novo Ordero Seclorum or whatever. You know, out of chaos order, new world order, a new order of the ages, the golden age, and the occult people, you know, and the Masonics and all that, you know, the secret societies. They all believe that the golden age was the time before the flood. You know, when you had Poseidon ruling and his 10 sons. You know, so this is where we're at again. We're right back to the beginning. The genetic manipulation of everything, and now to try to forcibly genetically alter us, corrupt us. Because Yahushua died for human beings, not for cyborgs and not for chimeras and genetically altered humans. And these people that are pushing this stuff, you know, like Bill Gates, I mean, he's a eugenicist. His father was a eugenicist that helped Margaret Sanger get Planned Parenthood started. So, you know, you just do, you know, once you begin to start to, you know, this guy, why is he even still walking around? I mean, people that are doing this kind of stuff, adulterating the food, which one of his companies that he started that does this artificial meat has tanked. It's, you know, stock value went to zero pretty much, from like $8 billion valuation to zero, because nobody's buying it. Because people are waking up, because the Ruach is moving. But there's still a segment of people that just refuse to see the truth of where we're at and what's going on. And the idea is that anybody, that's the reason, you know, they say it's all about climate change, you know, they got to get rid of the cows because they, you know, break wind, and it's messing with the climate, which is insane. Because at one point in this country, they estimate that the bison herd was somewhere between 60 and 100 million animals. And a bison, you know, a full-grown bison is twice the size of a cow or a bull. I mean, they're huge. And they had an incredibly positive effect on the environment. I mean, they've even done, you know, experiments where they've took bison, they took like this one place on the Navajo reservation, and there was a lot of people against it because they raised cattle there. They said, oh, they'll destroy the cattle grazing and all that. And they released like 500 of these bison. Just let them go. And within like 3 or 4 years, they had completely altered the place. There was all kinds of plant life and wildlife and stuff that had started reestablishing that area, because there was all these seeds in the ground that had been deposited there either from birds or that just washed there in rain, because it was pretty barren. I mean, it was scrub land. But bison, when they walk, their hooves kick the dirt out. I mean, it just like a plow almost. And they don't graze like cows do. Cows graze in a certain area. They just graze right there in one area. You kind of have to move cows around because they'll graze a place to the nubbins. But bison, they constantly move. They're constantly moving around. They never stay. They don't overgraze places, and they'll eat anything pretty much. As where cows typically go after certain things, the real prime sweet plants. As where bison, they'll eat thistles and I mean, you name it, man. I mean, they'll eat it, and they wallow, and wherever they wallow at, it makes little catchments for water. I mean, it's just like little miniature ponds or whatever, and then next thing you know, you got frogs there, and you got plants growing around it, and I mean, it's amazing. So that wasn't the problem, as far as 100 million bison didn't affect the environment. In fact, they were a net positive for the environment. And so, and we don't have nowhere near that many cows here. I don't think we got 100 million cows, or cattle, maybe 50 million or something like that. But regardless, these animals, they really don't have no effect on the climate one way or the other. And cows, even cows, if they're free to go, free to roam, I mean, they may graze down a place and then they'll move on. Then they won't have no choice. But they begin to, over time, they begin to get kind of feral. If you just leave them alone, they'll get feral, and they'll they'll break up into small herds, like with a bull and some heifers and stuff, and they'll have their little herds, and have a little herd. This bull over here's got his little herd, and that kind of thing, and they work their way into like canyons and stuff. I mean, they get feral, they get wild, and which is no different than any other animal. They're going to revert back to their what their natural state was, as long as they're not being messed with. And so it's just the fact that they know that we're meat eaters. We have to have meat to sustain us, red meat. And if you look at in Leviticus, where it talks about the Levitical diet, they were encouraged to eat meat, lots of meat. They eat lots of meat. They eat oxen, they eat cows, they eat sheep. I don't know if they eat goats or not. I mean, they raise goats, but I don't know if they eat them. I'm not sure about that. But I know they eat beef, cows. They eat, and they were healthy people as long as they done right. And generally, the ailment that they would get if they didn't do right would be leprosy. They would come down with leprosy or something. And then occasionally they get boils on them or something. And then, if they'd repent or whatever and then go to the priest, he would tell them to go cleanse in the Jordan River, dip in the water so many times, like that. I think his name was Haman. He was he was a Syrian. He was one of the captains or generals under Ben Hadad or something like that, and he felt beneath doing that. He says, "Is there not better rivers in Syria that I could dip in?" And all that. He thought he was just going to go there and he was going to say some kind of ritual or whatever and cleanse him. He wouldn't even come out and talk to him. He told his assistant, and I think it was Elisha, and he told his assistant to go out and tell him, go dip in the Jordan River 7 times and you'll be cleansed. And he was, that's beneath me. And his assistant finally convinced him, hey, you come all this way and this guy's telling you how you can get rid of this. Don't you think you ought to at least try and see? And he did. He brought all kinds of honoraria and gifts to give him and all that, and he said, I don't want it. And then Elijah's assistant or whatever, he was a priest, ran after him and took his booty or whatever and come back, and he died. Or no, he got the leprosy. He got the leprosy that Haman had. So, but they lived, as long as they were doing what was right, keeping his commandments, judgments, and statutes, they never got sick. They were, incredibly healthy and lived to ripe old ages, 100, 110, 120 years old. So we were, this design, this avatar, or whatever you want to call it, because this is not the real us. This is just what we became, at the fall of Adam. This is what he took on. He went from being a spiritual being of flesh and bone to being flesh and blood. And life and death is in the blood, both. This physical death, but really we are meant to be spiritual beings that can take on a flesh and blood or a flesh and bone appearance. But we would be, it's just like Paul said, he says, we don't know what we shall be, but we know that when we see him, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. We don't really know how he is. Not really. He just appears to us in his flesh and bone appearance. It says that Elohim is spirit. So it would stand to reason that they are too. They're spirits. And that we're spirits that can, ultimately manifest into a physical, take on physicality. But you see, like with the demonic, the demons, the departed Nephilim, they become disembodied spirits. They could not take on physicality anymore. They are trapped in their spiritual, in the spirit realm. They can't manifest into the physical world anymore. So that's why they seek to go in and possess people. And it's just like with this AI and stuff, they're talking about, it's going to be, artificial general intelligence, where it's going to actually be able to think and question it. I don't really think so. I think it's just going to do what is put in it. It's just, it's able to look at correlations between information and put things together in that sense, but it doesn't understand. It's just like this guy was saying, it's like if you were in a room and there was these books in there with the Finnish language, written in it. You didn't know how to speak Finnish, but you could take and look in one of these books and you begin to see where after certain words there'd be another letter, like after a consonant there would be a certain vowel. You know, it's just like or a vowel. It might be or a consonant. It might be another consonant. It's like, you know, the word that. You know, you got th, and then you have a vowel. Well, you get to see these patterns. It works off of pattern recognition, and so you know, if somebody slid a request under the door, slipped a piece of paper under the door, and asked you for a certain book, and you looked at it and you couldn't read finish, but you could look at the words, the letters, how they were arranged, and you could begin to figure it out by correlating it, you know, a pattern. You know, you start seeing these patterns, and so you would just figure out, okay, I need to get this book, this is what they're asking for, and you'd slide it out there, but you still wouldn't be able to speak finish, you know, or read it. You know, you're just going by, okay, well, I see these letters here, and these are the same letters on this book over here, okay, you know, and you slide it out, but you still don't understand finish. Well, it's the same with this AI. It can correlate. It can, you know, you put this information in, and then it just goes and starts looking through all these databases, you know, like Google. Just like when you Google something, that's all you're doing is you're putting in the information, and the computer system through algorithms is just going around looking for something that matches that. But the computer has no idea what it is. I mean, it don't know. It's just matching stuff. That's the reason, you know, you get all these landing pages. You know, you get 500 landing pages. Well, you get them 500 landing pages because it's just bringing everything that matches that. You know, maybe the AI can match it more closely, you know, and get it down to where it's only a couple of landing pages. But ultimately, you know, but it's not to say though that these demonic spirits and stuff couldn't inhabit it. I mean, we don't know. I mean, I don't know how, what capabilities they, you know, have. I mean, if it is maybe even being made to accommodate them. I mean, again, I don't know, and I don't think any of these people that are doing this stuff knows. You know, I think they just are, you know, under the direction of these entities. You know, they're putting these ideas in their head, and, you know, showing them stuff, you know, from the aether, from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, you know, and then they're building it, and they really don't even fully they don't, you know, you go ask any of these people, you know, do you really understand all of this and how it's all working together, and they really don't. They really don't understand what they're doing. They're just doing it. They're just hooking, you know, rack after rack after rack of these servers with these GPUs in them, and doing these, you know, what they call large language models. And they say that they've ran out of human generated information to feed it. Now they're having to create artificially generated data, information to feed to it, because they've scanned all of the world's libraries. You know, I've talked about that, how they, you know, even these libraries that are private libraries, you know, like over in Europe, the elites over there in the Vatican, and, you know, which I don't know if the Vatican let them scan it all. I don't know. But, you know, if they've got as many books over as they claim, you know, miles and miles and miles of shelves down in them catacombs of books, which it wouldn't surprise me that, like I said, that when Hasatan was released and he was, finding people to work with him, that's probably one of the first things he said. We got to, round up all the books that you can round up. And so, anything written, any kind of, papyrus or, scrolls, cylinders. And it's funny how whenever there's a discovery, like an archaeological discovery somewhere, boy, they swoop in there, either the Catholics or the Smithsonian or somebody, they swoop in there like vultures to go grab up all this stuff. And because they're afraid that it's going to spill the beans. I often wondered why they were so intent on, getting to these sites and getting a hold of them. What is it that they're trying to hide? The giants. Of course, they go and get all the bones and all that stuff. We know that. They've been doing that for 100 years or more. But it's really, now it dawns on me that it was about getting the information. It's about getting any kind of written material. Either is to keep us from finding out the truth about things, or they're looking for something. They're looking for some kind of information that's going to help them in some kind of way. Whether it is doing this genetic stuff, whether it's building this AI, or calling up these entities, getting them out, freeing them up out of their prison, and bringing them out here to go around and do exactly what their intention, which I believe here at the end, their intention is to either destroy you or to make you into something that will go along with them against the camp of the saints in the holy city. Either convert you into some kind of cyborg or to some kind of genetic freak, some kind of genetic abomination. And it's sad that so many people just, without a thought, just are willing to let them do that to them. You'd think that, there's way more people, I guess. I believe that, most of the beings on this planet, or on this earth, not planet, on this earth, are humans. Now, there's probably a lot of them that ain't, that are Nephilim, hybrids or whatever. Because again, these entities, these fallen ones, they can appear like human beings. They can appear pretty much any way they want to. And, because it says, consider it no wonder that Satan can appear as an angel of light. Because he can. He does have certain powers, about how he can appear and stuff. But he can't be everywhere. He can't do everything. He can't see into the future. He can't do any of these things. He's not omnipotent. He's not omniscient. He's not, omnipresent. He has to have his minions to tell him what's going on and show him what's going on, and he just doesn't have that ability. But I think he would use something like AI to try to have that kind of ability to be able to monitor and watch everybody, for him, and then he can just consult it, tell it, again, to watch everything that's going on, and if there's anything out of the way, you let me know. you know, and then it does. It shows him, you know, what these people are doing or whatever. But I just, you know, I kind of got to thinking about it that, man, they are in a really mad rush to do some of this stuff. And I was like, why? Why are they in such a just an all-fire hurry? Well, if there ain't that much time left, that would pretty much answer that question. They know there ain't that much time left. And they are fulfilling, you know, again, this is the Father's plan. I mean, and they're going to follow his plan. Even if, you know, they have sided with Hasatan, you know, he just uses Hasatan too, you know, to test us. We're being tested. I mean, that's just all there is to it. And we either yield ourselves to him and, you know, let him correct us. As I've said before, we have a problem with our reasoning, and he has to fix it. But he can only do that if we allow him to. We have to be willing to yield ourselves over to him. And then he will begin the process of correcting us. But until we are willing to submit to him completely, he can't. It has to be voluntary. We have to willingly, voluntarily yield ourselves over to him in obedience. He requires our obedience above everything else. And so I just kind of wanted to, you know, because I've been thinking about this stuff a lot, you know, I mean, why now? You know, why all these things kind of converging all at once? And all this stuff coming out about these, you know, these buildings, all these structures, all these tunnels, these rail systems, these trains, I mean, enormous trains that, you know, no way humans built these things back in the 1800s. We just didn't. They were huge. It's like I was talking about the rails. I mean, we didn't even have a steel industry, so how could they, you know, make 250,000 miles of rails in the 1800s when we didn't even have a steel industry? You know, and in these lighted cities and all that stuff, like the White City up there in Chicago or Chicago, all lit up like Las Vegas, before they even had the first power plant. I mean, and like I said before, I mean, why I never questioned any of that stuff? I guess, like I said, I mean, the ability to think critically had been indoctrinated out of me, I guess, or educated out of me. You know, I was in that school system that, you know, keep them busy and dumb, looking up irrelevant facts, you know, lies, a bunch of useless stuff, just to keep you occupied and dumb. And the whole time you think you're learning something, and really you're not. It's just like I said about the physics. The physics that they teach is not true. You know, and the lie about gravity and all that stuff, even though you asked any of them what gravity is, and none of them can tell you. But it exists, to hear him say it. And it really is all just electromagnetism. Everything is electric. I will say that the people, the Thunderbolt projects, like Will Thornhill, Will Thornhill? His name's Thornhill, though. I mean, he's a PhD in astrophysics or something like that right there. And they've come to the conclusion. I mean, these are not Christians or anything like that. I mean, they're agnostic or whatever. They call it the electric universe. You know, that everything they see up there, it's all behaves like electrical circuits and stuff. And so, you know, they know it ain't what we've been told. Now, whether they're right, I don't know. But I'm beginning to believe that it is, you know, that this whole system that we're in is electromagnetic. It's all electromagnetism. And that we're just pretty much holograms or simulations. But we're an advanced simulation that actually can feel, and you know, but it's the spiritual us though that's feeling it. That's you know, feeling what we feel and hearing what we it's being transferred to that. That's, you know, we are a spirit. You know, we have a spirit that gives us life, and it's, you know, it's just we are unable to disconnect from this flesh and blood. We're, you know, it's just like I said about Yahushua, he can go from being one to the other. He can take on a physical form, because remember when he appeared to his disciples after his death, when he was raised, when he was resurrected, and he just appeared, and I mean just appeared flesh and bone, you know, because doubting Thomas, you know, and he told them, you know, he says they looked at him like he was a ghost, and he says a spirit or a ghost or whatever. It's just, you know, a spirit doesn't have flesh and bone. Feel me? He was solid, flesh and bone, but he just out of nowhere. That's because his spiritual self can be anywhere. And he knows how to appear, make this system, make him a physical appearance, and then separate back away from it. And it goes back to the Aether, or to the Tree of Knowledge of Good and Evil, or the Aether, you know, the Prana, or the Akashic Record, whatever you want to call it. And then his spirit self goes wherever. We're back up to the third heaven. And so, but we're trapped. We're trapped in this, you know, our spirit is trapped in this physical simulation. We can't separate away from it. But that's what Paul was talking about, was dying to the flesh, you know, that's the separation, you know, separating ourselves from it. And, you know, that's the only way that we're ever going to be free from it, is to die to it, to begin, you know. Of course, it's not going to be final until we do die. But once we die, then that, you know, then we're separated from it from then on out. And then in the future, whenever we're resurrected and we're given a new body, then it's a glorified spiritual body that can appear and disappear at will. You know, you can go back to being you know, be a spirit and go wherever, and then reappear as flesh and bone. Or you can just stay flesh and bone and go, just stay where you're at or whatever. I mean, I don't know, some of it's just speculation, just based off of the way that Scripture reads. Am I absolutely correct in it? I don't know. I mean, the Ruach began to point these scriptures out to me and bring them back to my mind, that about Christ there, appearing out of nowhere. I mean, he didn't come through a door, he didn't come through a wall, he just appeared. And in other instances of that same kind of thing happening. And then going back to Adam, where Adam said, your name is woman, for you are flesh of my flesh and bone of my bone. And this is before his fall. So, I just don't think that we will have the same, and Paul also, says, flesh and blood shall not enter the kingdom of heaven. So, we won't have blood. We'll be flesh and bone. And, it's just that we will be fully spiritual beings. And we can separate from that avatar, if you will, at will. Whenever we want to, we can, separate away from it. As we're now, we can't. We're trapped in these meat bags, if you will. So I don't know. Just something to think about. I tend to like to do these videos because a lot of this is just me talking stuff out. For my own benefit. Because there's been so much that has been revealed that it's just really, it's hard to take it all in and to just hold it in. You got to kind of like talk it out. And I kind of get tired of just talking to myself. So I do these. This is sort of like my way of talking it out and putting it out there to where, and I even look at these videos. I'll go back and look at them myself and just listen to what I had to say, and kind of critique it, as well. Does that make sense? Or to people, does it sound crazy? Well, I guess some of it does sound crazy, but I don't know, that Yahushua told me to start focusing on him, and I started focusing on him, and when I did and quit, kind of pulled back away, then I just started seeing just all this stuff started coming. I just began to see all this stuff. It's sort of like I had to regroup and get away from the things that I had been raised up with, the dispensational stuff. I had to just do away with it and kind of start over. I'm not saying that, start over from the basic, that Yahushua, came here, he lived, he died, and was resurrected, and he is the propitiation for our sin. He paid the price. And if we keep his commandments, and the commandments he gave us was to love the Father with all our heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love our neighbor as ourselves. For in this is all of the law and the prophets. And so, in obedience to the Father. Then that is the way to life. But all this other stuff is in the end, it really is just secondary to that truth. And it's not necessary for us to know it to gain salvation, to be redeemed, to know these things. But I think it falls under the realm of truth, knowing the truth, breaking through the deception. I think it helps build our belief. I think it helps strengthen our belief if we have this truth. If it helps us to, it also helps to reinforce the truth that we are in, this little last time that Hasatan is being given to deceive us. The last test of humanity, if you will, because it is a test, and we're being tested, and this is going to be the hardest test yet. And Yahushua told his disciples, he said, "I tell you of a truth, those who are first will be," because he said, "Who shall be the greatest in the kingdom of Elohim?" And he said, "I tell you of a truth, those who are first shall be last, and those who are last shall be first." And I thought about that quite a bit. What does that really mean? I believe it means that the people at the very last that maintain their faithfulness and loyalty to the Most High will be the greatest in the kingdom. And the first, the apostles, they'll be the last. And the reason I believe that is they saw with their own eyes, they saw him raise the dead. They saw him feed 5,000 people plus women and children. 5,000 men plus women and children. And he done it twice. They saw him make storms stop. They saw him heal countless people. They saw him cast out demons. They saw him do all of this stuff. So, it didn't take a lot to convince them. But we are living completely off of belief. And, and I'm sure Hasatan was pretty wide open back then too, but in a different way. I think now that he is going to go all out. I mean, he is going to come at humanity with everything that he can come at us with. And one of the things he's done is to try and weaken people by convenience. To make us soft, to where, if times get hard and tough, our ancestors, people 100 years ago, people still kind of lived, agrarian life. Most of the people still lived on farms and stuff. So they could, it might have been tough, but, they could weather the storm because they could feed themselves and stuff. And yeah, I mean, it was hard on people who lived in cities and stuff because, they wasn't able to produce food for themselves and all that. But, those people could migrate out, into the rural areas a lot of times and, find, go chop some wood for somebody and get something to eat, I mean, but now they've systematically got rid of, the majority of the little small family farms and stuff, and replaced it with all these big corporate farms and stuff. And of course, they're not, you can go there and do whatever you want, and they ain't going to give you nothing to eat, unless you submit to their system. Because it's all controlled by Satan. I mean, all of the, the food production and, the big processors and all that stuff, they're all, part of his system. And so, the comforts of life, that they've, over the last 100 years, they've kind of cultivated and let people have, so that they could bring us to this point where they're going to start denying those things, and people ain't going to be able to afford them. And then they can use that against you. They can use it as a weapon. Well, you want some food? Come on over here and let us give you this. Let us give you this. Or let us give you that. Or, you want to live in a nice, cozy little house, with heat and lights and running water and all that. People's gotten accustomed to it. So, now don't get me wrong, there's people, like in these third world countries, they'll have a better chance than people here in the first world will. I mean, because again, people here's gotten soft. Gotten too, attached to the conveniences. But, so that's why I think people that do manage to keep their integrity, keep their loyalty, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be incredibly difficult. That's why we got to stay in prayer and fast and pray for one another. Pray that, even pray that you be accounted worthy to escape these things and to stand before the Son of Man. Because that time is coming pretty quick. I think it's coming quicker than people believe. I kind of tend to lean towards what that young man said on that Tartaria Biblical Research channel. That he thinks that 2030 is the significant date. Because if you look, I mean, that seems to be the Agenda 2030. Why is that so significant to these people? To the UN and the World Economic Forum and all these people? Why? Is that D-Day? I don't know. It's just speculation on my part, but it certainly seems that something is coming. And it's coming faster than people realize. And all the more reason why we need to be right. All the more reason why we need to be repented. And to try and be, at peace with everybody. Even our enemies. And with that, I'm going to call it a night. I went way longer than I intended. Over an hour and a half. But it's, this is all kind of stuff that gets pent up in my mind, and I just have to kind of talk it out. And I appreciate the few folks that do watch me. I appreciate it. I appreciate you, being willing to listen. And I appreciate all of his comments. I appreciate, the new people who have subscribed. I hope that something I say may, help you in some way, may help you to have a better understanding, and that I myself will get a better understanding. Because again, this is kind of the way my mind works, is I have to talk stuff out, and I don't know, I don't think I'm the only person like that. I think it's maybe something that's just natural to humans, that we kind of have to talk things out to ourselves, you know. I mean, get everything kind of ordered and organized to where we can kind of understand it, or you know, see if it makes sense to us. And so I love all you folks. You know, and I always hope that you'll be blessed. And I hope that we all will be able to stand in the evil day and to do all to stand. And with that, I'm going to call it a night. And again, I love you. I hope you'll be blessed. And I'll see y'all again next week this time, hopefully on Shabbat. Just, you know, it's kind of late getting going, and but I felt like I needed to do something and put something up, and I'll see you next time.